being in technology is an interesting place to be in because you can never sit still. Technology is always changing. It's always pushing you to think about what you did yesterday is no longer good enough. You have to think about the next thing. You have to learn about the next thing. I've gone through the chapters of the internet, e-commerce, digital revolution, and now generative AI. And every morning I wake up wondering what's next.
Welcome back to CEO Tech Live. I'm your host, Ben Fanning, and this episode is powered by Hexaware. Today, we have for you Lucia Soares, who is Carlyle CIO, Head of Tech Transformation for the last 10 months, and has been a senior leader at Carlyle for the last 5 years. Previously, she served for 16 years as senior leader over at Johnson & Johnson in healthcare technology. And Lucia started her career in the early days of digital transformation, building the first websites and e-commerce platforms for her organization. Lucia, welcome to CEO Tech Live.
Thank you, Ben. It's great to be here.
So it's only apropos that we start with where you grew up, because it really applies to technology in and of itself. So what was it like growing up in Silicon Valley?
It's been an amazing experience, and it's a little bit of you're at the right place at the right time. So I grew up not thinking that I was going to go into technology, but when I was in college, I started working basically as a contractor at Fujitsu, and I fell into the internet revolution, quite literally. And being just surrounded by, when we went to lunch in the early days of my career, I was hearing about Apple and the troubles that it was having and Steve Jobs coming back. And you're just growing up with people who are leaning into innovation, want to disrupt, want to make a change and leave a legacy behind. And it was just a very inspiring experience for me. Of course, also very competitive, and there's good things and bad things that come with living in Silicon Valley, but I've benefited greatly from the disruptive kind of mentality that it's brought to me.
Yeah, where we grow up can impact us because we don't really know anything different. Because you're like, hey, this is just normal, right? Oh, we're talking about Steve Jobs. He's coming back to Apple. Who knows what he's cooking up over there? I mean, meanwhile, it happens to be the center of the tech universe.
Exactly. It's just crazy. And then everybody who wants to be like Steve Jobs is growing up around you too.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So what's your path been like to get here?
Yes, my name is Portuguese. My parents are immigrants from the Azores Islands, which are these 9 volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in between Boston and Lisbon. And my family basically for many, many years were born and raised on these islands, which are typically what people did there is farming in the farming industry. And that's where I get my name from. I grew up speaking only Portuguese at home. My parents came to the United States seeking the immigrant's dream. They came with a 4th grade education, because at the time, Portugal was under a dictatorship. This was 1970. And if you didn't have money, didn't come from a family with education, most likely you only would get taught to read, write, multiply, add, and subtract. My parents didn't even get to learn what division was. And so my dad had this idea in his head that he wanted a different future for his family. And so he and my mom, shortly after they got married, came to California. And they lived in a small town called Pescadero, which is a fishing town that, a little known fact, Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, grew up in. And basically they worked picking flowers in a greenhouse kind of area and slowly cobbled together some money to eventually have 5 children who today are all college educated. And so their dream really has come true. And it's an amazing story, as many immigrant stories are in America.
That is an amazing story. And I got to chill hearing you talk about it. So looking at your career and looking back, how has that formed you as a leader?
I started my career kind of in a non-traditional way. I alluded to the fact that, well, first of all, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And like many first generation college graduates or attendees, I was attracted to teaching. I thought this is an amazing career. I felt inspired by wanting to teach the next generation. And I majored in literature, and foreign languages was my thing. But in the middle of being in school, I, as I mentioned, fell into this job at Fujitsu, and I fell in love with technology. And as a result of falling in love with technology, it made me think about new possibilities. And so, first of all, it kind of took me out of a comfort zone. It was a really hard decision for me to say, I'm abandoning this idea that I wanted to teach and go into this field. I don't have an engineering degree. I don't know anything about computer science. But looking at my parents and their work ethic, the one thing they taught me was you can work hard and you can learn as much as other people can learn. And so I applied myself into this new passion that I had. And the rest is history. It's been almost 30 years now in technology. How has it affected me as a leader? I think being in technology is an interesting place to be in because you can never sit still. Technology is always changing. It's always pushing you to think about what you did yesterday is no longer good enough. You have to think about the next thing. You have to learn about the next thing. I've gone through the chapters of the internet, e-commerce, digital revolution, then the nascent kind of places around data analytics, AI, and now generative AI. And every morning I wake up wondering what's next. And so I think that it's created in me this desire to always be thinking about more, wanting more, and just making myself, my team, and my organization better than it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's been an incredible 30 years because so much has happened in a field. It's like we've been through several versions of an industrial revolution all within that time period. And it's like the learning edge that you've got to have, the insatiable desire to learn, to lead, the flexibility. I mean, my Lord, right? You could just be designing websites. Oh, well, I did this great website design and I'm just going to be this great website designer. But it's like practically like, what's a website? Right now, it's changed so much.
It is crazy. I'll tell you, I remember my first years, I was coding HTML manually, right? And then I think maybe 18 months after I started coding websites manually, this application called Front Page, maybe people as old as I remember, it was sort of this WYSIWYG tool that allowed you to create websites without manually coding them. And I thought, whoa, this is disrupting my job. I'll just think about how many disruptions have happened since then and what you need to do to keep up in this field. It's really challenging, but it's also very rewarding.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like you said, majoring in language. To me, we already mentioned Steve Jobs, but like you connect the dots looking back, and he was learning about that story about learning about fonts in school.
Yes,
Years
that's right.
later, you have Helvetica and all these beautiful Apple fonts. Thinking about you in language, right? Coding language, the language of different technologies. Maybe there's something in there.
I think there is. And Steve Jobs always used to say that he lived at the intersection of humanities and technology. He was very much like a Renaissance man, right? And how he thought about technology and the application to human beings, that's really inspiring. And I do think that in the field of technology, you have all sorts of diverse thinkers, some people who have grown up kind of in this humanities, languages, more creative kind of field, and some who have grown up in the engineering field. And the magic happens when those things collide together, when the experience is something that a human being gets value from and gets inspired by.
Oh, so good. When's the time you had an unexpected twist or failure in your career, and how did it lead to your growth on down the road?
Yes. So after I left Fujitsu, I joined a company called US Web. It was the first internet professional services firm in the United States. And so we were building the first websites that certain companies had, the intranets, if you remember the intranet word, the first e-commerce platforms. Very, very exciting. US Web kept being acquired and merging with many companies. It was very fast paced, if you can imagine. This was 1995, 96. If you remember, in 2000, there was a big dot-com bust. So companies' valuations had gone up, and then suddenly things just blew up. And as a result of that, at the time, the company was called March 1st. It had sort of merged and been acquired by and renamed March 1st. And it went bankrupt because a lot of our customers had been benefiting from a lot of the VC funding. And when that dried up, a lot of these companies that maybe they didn't have as solid a business model as maybe we would have wanted, they stopped being our customers and the company went bankrupt. And that was very unexpected. This was about 5 years out of school in my career. And I was so excited about the internet and all the value. And one day you wake up and you're like, wow, this has happened. But what I took from that experience is a small group of the West Coast kind of division of March 1st got together and we decided We were going to band together, form a separate entity because we still had some pretty great customers. And we were acquired by another company. And then we basically went from zero to back to profitability. And that taught me so much about, I wasn't the CEO, I wasn't the owner of the company, but what do you do as a leadership team when you face a crisis? And the ability to overcome and then learn from that, learn about being a lot more disciplined about the customers that you get, about looking at profitability, about the strategic planning around that. So that was an amazing experience, but definitely an unexpected twist in my career. And shortly thereafter, I ended up leaving and going into healthcare as a result of some more deeper self-reflection about what I wanted to do.
What a roller coaster ride, first of all. So you went from, okay, this internet thing is great. We're doing such great work. Oh my God, we're bankrupt, to now we're being acquired. From bankruptcy to being acquired, well, roughly how long a time span was that?
It was, I think, I want to remember, I think it's about 3 months. It was very, very fast, and it ended up working great. Yeah, I learned so much in that period of time.
Yeah, I bet. And it also just reflects your adaptability and your ability. Like you learned it at an early age because my gosh, yeah, the emotional roller coaster of business isn't for the faint of heart, especially in tech.
Yes, exactly. And you know what? The other thing about that experience is that early in my career, when I was so in love with this field of technology and so on, sometimes we think that our careers are our own identity. And when you have a crisis moment like this, where it feels like the career just fell apart, it forces you to realize that actually, no, your career is not your life. It's a part of your life. It's a piece of your identity, but it's not your whole identity. And so early on, I also kind of learned that it's important to separate ourselves and to not be just fully focused on that mission of the career, but also what else makes me who I am and where I want to spend my time and how I want to give back to the community. So I was really lucky, I think, to have experienced that early on.
Such wise words and a good reminder that you are not your career. And I know from my research understanding, you've really invested in your family life, right? You have 2 children, is that right? One's about to start college at Berkeley.
That's right. 2 daughters.
Which is wild. I mean, Berkeley is, yeah. It's a bit. Now, a side note, are they going into technology or are they
They're
going
not.
humanities or what's their direction?
My oldest daughter is not at this point in time anyway. I mean, I have to remind myself that I also didn't go into technology when I chose my major, right?
You're not a math major?
Who knows where she's going to go, but she's interested in global studies and languages. And she's much smarter than I ever was at her age. So I'm just incredibly proud of her and can't wait to see what she does with her life.
Yeah, so good. And I hope they enjoy this interview. Although if they're like my teenager, they may not listen. Well, at least the interview. Well, I don't know. So what was your first job and how does it still influence your leadership today?
So as I mentioned, my parents were immigrants, and because they didn't have a college education, they had blue collar jobs. But my dad is, to this day, I think, still the smartest individual that I know and very entrepreneurial. So he got a job as a custodian. It was a steady job, a job that provided benefits for his family, but he had passion for entrepreneurship. And so he had this idea of building a houseplant business. We had a home and it had a big backyard, and he built this big greenhouse. And in the afternoons, when we'd come home from school, we would all participate in sort of like watering the plants, planting new plants. And on the weekends, the family would sell those house plants at the local flea market. And so that was my first job. It was a family, quote unquote, a family business. What I learned from that is the incredible amount of hard work and responsibility that a small business owner has. That you have to buy your materials, that you have to figure out how to make a profit, but also that you have to focus on customer excellence. My dad was always very focused on, look, if somebody buys one of our houseplants and they come back 4 weeks later and the houseplant is dead, we're going to give them another one for free and we're going to tell them how to take care of it. He had this just sort of gut feeling about how you deal with customers and so on. Anyway, it was a hard life for him. He worked 7 days a week, never took a vacation for 20 odd years. But he raised 5 children in Silicon Valley with my mom. And he taught us this valuable lesson of whenever you go and work for someone, remember what it was like to own a business and be like that. Like pretend you're also part of owning this business to move it forward. So that was a really great lesson as well that I'm indebted to him for.
That's the ultimate lesson in business right there. Because how are we survive? How's our business survive? Well, we survive because we offer something of value to our customers, to our clients. And it's easy in a big company, and not to knock big company life, but you can get really disconnected from your customers. And then it starts to feel like, well, I'm just working for work's sake. Quality starts to slide, deadlines start to slide. Y'all just remember back to houseplant lesson number 1, right? I mean, the plant's got to survive. And if not,
in technology, because sometimes technology organizations are one step removed, right? They're building an ERP system or the CRM system. They're one step removed from those interactions with customers. Sometimes technology organizations fall into the trap of forgetting who the customer is, right? Our customers are our salespeople or the HR people in our business. We're delivering solutions to them. Yes, that's true. But ultimately, we're doing it for a greater reason. And I've always found that when my technology organization understands our business model, how we make revenue, what value we add to our customers and to the ecosystem of the economy in general, it just becomes a much more easy way to align people to deliver on excellence.
Houseplant leadership. And I love the idea because plants are living and thriving things, and they can be a little unpredictable.
They can.
Yeah, just like technology.
Like software systems.
So what's the worst leadership advice you've ever heard?
So I don't like to hear fake it until you make it. And I actually appreciate where it's coming from because I've read a lot on this topic of especially first generation college graduates or the first of whatever. People come into a job and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. And maybe they don't have confidence. And so people say, well, fake it till you make it as a way to sort of inspire something in you to be like, you can overcome it, right? But when I first heard that advice, I was like, that sounds not genuine and not authentic and like I'm lying or I'm cheating. And so I didn't like that advice because I feel like you do need to be grounded on ethics. You need to be grounded on truth and that you shouldn't like overcommit on something that you're not sure about. But at the same time, there are situations where you need to take risks and you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone. So I do appreciate that part of it, but I don't think it's good advice because it makes sometimes people feel like they need to be something that they're not.
Yes. And I like the word risk. Like to me, that's the balancing to that. Hey, sometimes you got to take a risk. Have you done something before that you need to do? Well, gauge the risk. Can you do it? Do you have the self-belief? Do you have the resources? Do you have the idea to do this? First is, hey, we're just going to say yes and see what happens. And that's no way to take care of your house plants or your customers.
There you go.
Yeah. So thinking about your career, thinking about the timeline of it, being a woman in the C-suite, you were growing up in Silicon Valley. There were not a lot of CEO, C-suite leaders that were women at the time. And that's begun to change. Although I would say it's in the underrepresented group in the C-suite, even today. What's your advice for people from underrepresented groups that are on a mission to get to the C-suite?
My advice to them is to not feel that just because there isn't someone like you there, that you can't be the first one there. I have a mentor of mine that says, if you can see it, you can be it. Like if you can imagine it in your head, then you can do it. And I think that our times are a little bit different. I'm not saying that it isn't hard. Yes, there are still challenges and I can tell stories about challenges that I faced, but I stand on the shoulders of the women that came before me. And I feel like we're just continuing to move forward and to really embrace those opportunities. So the way I think about it is, number one, you need to have courage to do something new or to be the first one. And with courage comes confidence. Number two, you need to surround yourself with people who are going to be supportive of you, with true mentors that are going to give you genuine advice, right? That are going to be honest with you and talk about your failings as well as your successes. And I think it is important for people who are kind of first in their category or a minority in their category to have safe conversations like, hey, I just faced a situation. I really don't know what to do. Can you give me some advice? That kind of thing. So I think that's really important to surround yourself. And number three, I think it's important to give yourself some grace. I think there's sometimes a lot of pressure. I see my daughter and the competitiveness about the college applications, and there's sort of like cutthroat, stressful feeling. And I learned this in healthcare and also learned it through my own personal health challenges when I was a kid, is that life is short and you got to keep your end goal in mind. Sometimes that end goal isn't a seat at the board room or a certain title or promotion. Sometimes it's a much bigger goal. And when you contextualize the bigger view of your life in terms of your career, then I think it becomes easier to be like, sure, I can do that. Why not? So that's how I think about it.
So continuing down that train of thought, what do you hope your leadership legacy will be?
I hope that when people talk about having worked with me, that they say a couple of things. One is that I generated opportunity and possibility for them and for the businesses that I was in, that I didn't stand still, that I wasn't complacent, and that I pushed people to be their best. Number two, I hope that they say that they learned a lot from the experience, that maybe it wasn't always an easy journey, but that through growing and being challenged to do things that they didn't think they could do before, that they were able to do it. And finally, I hope they can say they had some fun too, in the middle of it.
Well, I certainly had fun today in this interview, Lucia. What's your parting thought for our listeners?
My parting thought is to keep innovating, keep moving forward, and to not embrace fear, but to embrace courage as we create our future together.
All right, let's go, y'all. Lucia, thanks for coming on CEO Tech Live.
Thank you so much, Ben. My pleasure.